welcome to the ICT Pulse podcast. I'm Michelle Marius, your host and the editor and publisher of ICT Pulse, the online platform where we discuss ICT issues from a Caribbean perspective. In 2019, when we were examining innovation, we took a closer look at one of the key elements of the ecosystem, the collaboration space, an environment where members of the tech community can assemble with the purpose of nurturing and advancing ideas. At the time, we spoke with Eldon Marks, the founder and director of Nexus Hub Inc., a technology and innovation center in Georgetown, Guyana. He is also the co-founder of a co-working space, We Own Space, in Georgetown, and the founder and CEO of V75 Inc., a tech firm specializing in conversational artificial intelligence engineering. As we continue the exploration of one of our running themes for 2021, social impact tech businesses, we thought it opportune to check back in with Eldon to see how Nexus Hub has been doing since we last spoke, but more importantly, to discuss social entrepreneurship, the benefits, the challenges, and why tech entrepreneurs ought to embrace the concept. Eldon, welcome back.
Hi, Michelle. Thanks for having me back.
So, before we jump into it, how have you been?
I've been good in spite of everything that's happening, worldwide. So I think I'm in a very good place overall. Yeah,
Okay, that's so great because as we all know, people have been struggling in so many different
I
ways.
know, I know.
Okay, but since we last spoke, and I mean September 2019, can you give us a sense of what has happened at Nexus Hub?
Right. So yeah, there's been quite a lot of activity. I think after we spoke, what happened notably was that the company that we partnered with to run our paid apprenticeship program originally, Clink Inc. in Ann Arbor, Michigan, they had invited the two cohorts up to Michigan to an AI summit that they organized. So there were 14 persons that were flown up along with myself and another to chaperone. And this was a 1 week series of activities where they learned a bit more about the Clink platform and the particular field of conversational AI. And they were also given these certifying exams. So they were fully certified as AI competency engineers around November 2019. Shortly afterwards, I think around the same time, Clink had requested that we run another batch. So we got some additional funding from them to run another paid apprenticeship program, which launched in later November of 2019. And that concluded in the end of January of 2020. But at the start of 2020, I think we were looking at mobilizing a pilot of our tech park initiative that I shared with you the last time we spoke, and we were in negotiations with a landlord to rent and renovate a space nearby, just a building away, until we raised enough funding to build that building that we had in mind. And the plan was to evaluate that co-working and industrial training, those components for the model, the tech park model. And another compelling reason was that we were running out of space where we were, given the growth of the movement. And we pretty much reached our maximum capacity, and just having an additional office space was much needed. In March of 2020, that's when COVID hit our shores, and we pretty much had to shelve those plans of moving forward with the pilot, and we all began working remotely. And the team, the Hacksolver team, when COVID hit, we decided to repurpose Iris. Remember Iris, that conversational AI project that was the product of a previous Hacksolve of ours? We got together and repurposed Iris to become this virtual assistant, which answers questions about the virus and staying safe. And we produced a prototype and launched it, and we were able to inform citizens about the virus, and it even conveyed local and international stats about the virus that we pulled directly from the WHO. And this was just this was just a pilot project that we launched, but that made waves, and we were personally congratulated by the the CEO of IDB Lab, Irene Hoffman from DC, on the initiative. And we later shifted. We had an additional hack solve planned in May. We shifted that to a fully virtual deployment. We had 40 persons sign up for it, but at the time there was a lot of activity in Guyana around solutions centered on, joining the COVID-19 fight. So there were a lot of various solutions that popped up, most of which overlapped. So we designed the focus of the hack solve to just have everyone meet each other, share their solutions, and come up with what we crafted as an ICT response framework to highlight areas of need in the COVID fight and better align our efforts within the ICT space. In June 2020, we were awarded a second IDB Lab grant for the execution of a project entitled Developing Guyana's ICT Sector. And this was framed around the industrial training objectives of our Tech Park initiative. So that was an ideal map for us. We were really excited about the opportunity. And in August of 2020, IDB Lab, in collaboration with IDB Lab, IDB Guyana, they approved the repurposing of our grant funds from a first grant towards the COVID fight in Guyana. So we were able to get additional other funding to really push IRIS to full production to serve the citizens of the country. And since then, we launched a nationwide service which allowed citizens to subscribe to IRIS updates via WhatsApp, email, SMS, and they could even call in, but this came at an additional charge. Uh, Later on, we met with the Minister of Health and his COVID task force, and we prepared an MOU with them. And this was supposed to deliver on the needs which they highlighted in terms of the COVID fight nationally. And they wanted additional other things added to the list in addition to IRIS, such as an app to help passengers come into the country a bit more seamlessly to be screened, a contact tracing app, as well as a data aggregation and reporting system to unify their disparate systems that they currently used. And I think that pretty much wraps it up. It brings us full circle to where we are. Quite a lot of things.
Wow. I mean, outside of a global pandemic, 2020 was a very good year for the Nexus Hub and for a lot of the ventures in which you're involved. But that is so fantastic because it almost seems though that, and I wonder as I go through the year and talk, to people, whether or not looking back at 2020 and at least in the tech space, there's almost a sense that there was an inflection point that was experienced last year. I don't know if that, I mean, history will prove me right or wrong, but even from what you're saying, because one can be in the trenches for so long, but then something just happens and everything just starts to snowball in a way that one would never have expected or anticipated, and certainly with the momentum that it had. So what were your thoughts though?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I think the pandemic, COVID, it hit with a certain negative impact, but there were positive spin-offs. And this is what you typically get with crises. They push you to act. They push you to change very very rapidly and respond. And in terms of that particular point where things started to really shift, for us in Guyana, it was around April, I would say, March, April, thereabout, where businesses started to really feel the impacts of social distancing. Brick and mortar stores had to really send their workers home or reduce their hours. And so the business community in particular had to really think fast and adapt and move forward. We were also similarly affected. Uh, the nonprofit side, as you know, we have the nonprofit and there is a for-profit entity, V75 Inc., and that was the resident tech company within Nexus. We had a huge impact in terms of COVID because our primary client was hit pretty hard, and they started to scale back in terms of. So our projections really were they had to be thrown out. So we had to think fast in terms of really adapting and going into revenue save mode preemptively as well.
Okay. Now, granted that, I guess that certainly would have been one of the challenges that you, Nexus Hub, V75, and so on experienced last year. And I'm sure the whole issue about one running out of space almost became moot as well. But were there any other challenges?
Right. Well, yeah. In addition to the obvious economic ones, it was just shifting to this remote paradigm, which is entirely new. Even though we started work remotely, but this was done to a lesser extent. Everyone had to shift to that remote paradigm. So a lot of persons had to really adjust, and because there wasn't a controlled environment to you know uh, bolster productivity, that became a challenge with us. So we had to put additional measures in place to ensure that persons were motivated to work. We tremendously increased the check-ins. We were on almost endlessly, like back-to-back conference calls on a daily basis. And then we had to come up with ways in which, because we were a social bunch, ways in which we can offset not being able to socialize as we typically would, and we came up with these virtual hangs and whatnot. We had a virtual office where persons can just, connect and just work in the presence of others virtually. So that was another challenge to us in terms of shifting to that remote paradigm. But the one of the spin-off benefits of it is that with all the frequent calls that we had, we were able to really, strangely enough, connect better. I know it's a funny thing, because we had more, we focused more on the conversation, and there were more of us in the call, as opposed to when we actually worked in the office, and we would just hop over to someone else's desk. It would just be more along the lines of a one-on-one type of thing if we didn't actually have those group sessions. So the conference calls kind of brought everyone together, and we were able to connect better, strangely enough.
Hmm. Well, like, it does sound sort of, I guess, what, almost a little bit oxymoronic. But I think what it is that in an office, or I think it's just a company that we really take solace in, that the fact that there is somebody in the next office, or in the same room with you, or whatever, and that's maybe enough most of the time. So I think that is why now the actual active engagement that one had to do remotely, I think that is why there maybe have been a greater sense of greater connection between the team.
Absolutely.
And I guess that is certainly an adjustment. And luckily, I think, it would appear that you and the team embraced it. But what might have been some of the other adjustments that you had to make personally and to the business over the past year?
Right. Yeah. So to just detail that out. So on a personal level, for me, shifting to a remote work environment was kind of challenging, especially with a family, and then I have two young boys as well. So finding that quiet space, and that ability to really not have to context switch every 5 minutes was a challenge for me. So that was to be honest, the whole context switching and getting adjusted to the context switching and having you do about as much as you possibly can on work related activities until your son walks in and asks for some help for something or the other, and then you have to context switch. So, and then there was the virtual school thing, which was an entire reality in its own right, just to
Yes.
adjust to that. So the whole work from home scenario really brought personally some additional other challenges, but it was exciting as well to really be home with the family and mix work in on top of that, rather than have to spend an entire extended day away from them. So it was good on that level, but really challenging in terms of the context switching that was brought on by it.
Understood. But what about in terms of, I mean, as an entrepreneur, as the leader of an organization to whom others are dependent for their livelihoods? Uh, what were you anxious throughout the year financially as to how you would take care of your family, and even your employees and the staff being able to manage as well?
Right. So as I mentioned, when the one of our major clients decided to scale back, um, I wasn't particularly anxious. The way I'm designed is that, change happens all the time. You have to be ready for it. So you stay as fluid as possible. When problems come before you, you try to lay everything out, get a bird's eye view, and then refocus your efforts and adapt as you need to. So immediately what happened was that we started, I mean, there was a smaller group of us from the company that started to bounce ideas around about things that we can actually do. What do we have to work with? How can we pivot? And we eventually came up with this particular model. As a matter of fact, we later involved every single employee in the company to come up with this model because we pitched it to them. We said, these are the options. One of the options that they settled on was that we won't let anyone go. We don't want to do that. That's a typical thing with businesses. You kind of terminate contracts to save your company. But we are a people first type of organization. So we don't want to put anyone in a very difficult position to just lose their job during hard times just to save the company. So we pitched it to the entire staff and we said, we can save everyone, but this is how we can have to do. We have to do it together. So everyone needs to figure out a way in which we can accept just a little less every month so that we can save as many of us as possible. And so everyone came up with this particular plan where we would, uh, instead of being, your typical full-time employees that'll be paid according to the 160 hours a month, we would drop everyone's hours down to a particular minimum wage level. And they would pretty much effectively become part-time employees with us. That way we can establish that we'll pay them regardless of how much they work, as long as they're able to meet, make ends meet where they are. But if we call upon them to work a bit more, they clock hours beyond that, and then they get paid accordingly. So it was a particularly efficient model where we were able to still grow as a company and save everyone else in the process.
Interesting. And I mean, I'm going to put you on the spot. Was there then a sense, and I mean, that it created efficiencies, but was there also a sense that perhaps you could have gotten away with, the company could have managed with less people than you currently have?
Yes, there were scenarios that we explored where we could have managed with less people. Um, I mean, the state that we were in pre-pandemic was one in which we were good on revenue, and it's not that we had individuals that just sat around doing nothing, but we were on a growth path, so we needed the additional other individuals who were not necessarily post-pandemic um, aligned with the trajectory that we were aiming for pre-pandemic. So it's almost as if we said, given that there is a pandemic right now and there are these conditions, we it won't be feasible to move forward with certain trajectories. So in that regard, these other individuals may not be as needed, but they're still necessary nonetheless to the functioning of the company. So we could have just cut the appendages off, so to speak, and saved some revenue and move forward. But how do we recover from that as a company when things get back to normal? You can't.
Yes, and I guess many of our countries are small places, so yes, it may be ill advised to do that.
Yes.
And what lessons have you learned, over the past year and a half?
Well, thinking about it, the foremost lesson is that, as I mentioned, it change is the only constant. We were we were pretty confident in how 2020 would play out when we started it. I mean, we were seeing things happening in far-flung areas of the world, but we never thought that it would eventually grow to such a pandemic proportion and then eventually hit our shores. We thought it would be contained eventually. So one of the primary lessons that I've learned is never take anything for granted. Always ensure that you look miles ahead and you be ready for change and be as flexible as possible to adapt, and never really set your heart on certain definitions. Just be as agile as possible. So that's one of the major lessons that I learned. The other one is, and this is primarily from the experiences uh, during the pandemic. In spite of what was happening around, there was still growth and there was still opportunity being created within the nonprofit. And from that, I gathered that as long as you have passion, that bolsters your purpose. And then if you're on purpose, if you're acting on purpose, it attracts results, it attracts things to support your purpose. So the whole awarding of a grant, of an additional grant to Nexus during the pandemic, that perfectly aligned with what our original plans were for the tech park, which we had no idea how we would actually launch that financially, is a testimony to just being on purpose, regardless of whether you can identify whether you have the means to do it or not. As long as you have a belief in something and you have that passion, then purpose will move forward, and then you'll be supported for it. So those are the two main learnings that I gathered from the stretch.
Okay, wonderful. And let's change gears and really talk now about aspects of a social enterprise. And the first question I usually ask is, do you think of Nexus Hub as a social enterprise? And if so, why? And if you don't, why not?
Yeah, Nexus is a social enterprise by definition, primarily because it's impact driven, but it also all of its initiatives are designed to be purposefully profitable. It has to be sustainable. So in that regard, yeah, it is a social enterprise.
Okay. And I'm sure that you're somebody who has given a lot of thought to topics such as this.
Mhm.
And the Caribbean region is awash with social problems, but tech-enabled social enterprises seem to be few and far between. Why do you think that is the case?
Yeah, it's a funny thing because I was looking. I mean, when we were traveling and connecting and just networking, I was constantly looking for other entities. We were in the region, and I was constantly asking around, this is what we do. Do you have any other entities locally that do the same thing? And, we came up with nothing. And one of the possibilities of explaining that could be that, as tech is identified as really a lucrative field, it's it's sort of what's layered on top of it is our different brand of priorities in the region to ensure that we take care of profit first, and then once we're comfortable enough, then we can think about making that impact. So I believe that may be the only reason that came to mind in not finding similar other tech enabled social enterprises regionally. It's primarily because we have a different brand of priorities in the region. We have to establish ourselves. We have to make sure that we are comfortable enough revenue wise before we start to think about making impact. Maybe that could be it.
It's true. It's true. And I think to varying degrees, well, so many different things, as you rightfully said. I think tech is it is seen as something that is non-traditional. So I think there in the fight for legitimacy, one has to be financially successful. The business has to be financially successful, and then, as you rightfully said, maybe at a later point, ventures that would look at solving social problems and societal problems may come to the fore. That I think is definitely a point of note as well. And certainly too, I think we are all inspired by the major successes that have been realized overseas, in the Silicon Valleys of the world and the like.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
that is also influencing how, our own perception and therefore the values that we imbue our businesses with.
that's right. And another thing that came to mind to answer that question is that because there isn't a critical mass, there aren't real case studies or examples of such entities. Uh, I guess persons don't really see the need to take the risk, or it may not even come to mind to create a tech related social enterprise, because where would they go from there? Maybe persons can't answer that question, and they just appeal to being risk averse, perhaps.
There is that, and certainly too in the region where the ecosystem is not as forgiving. So if you're going to launch any sort of venture, then you hope to do it in a way that will allow it to have the greatest chance of success.
That's right.
And maybe a social enterprise may not necessarily or readily appear to be a venture that can do so for you.
That's true. That's true. Mhm.
Just to clarify, and since for those who might be new and had not listened to our earlier episode, for Nexus Hub, what are the impacts that you think you want it to have, and how do you measure its success?
So overall, with Nexus, it came about as a result of identifying certain deficits locally within our tech ecosystem. Namely, persons worked in silos, so there was minimal collaboration across entities. We had a relatively underdeveloped tech ecosystem, brought on by the fact that we couldn't retain the talent, and the companies couldn't grow because of it. So there was an issue with regards to our talent acquisition capability locally. And then we didn't do much global market penetration tech wise, which are all related deficits. So we decided to create Nexus in response to actively responding to those deficits and growing the tech ecosystem.
Okay. And how do you measure success? What are the key performance indicators that you have for Nexus Hub?
So with Nexus, our primary indicator of success would be the critical mass that we build when it comes to our investment in intellectual capital. So the specialists that we actually create to and then align to industry-based opportunities, that's primarily our measure of success. How many local specialists we foster, and then how many of them we're able to align with local opportunities to stay here and help develop Guyana, for instance. So that's primarily what drives us. That's the end all be all of it. And there are other things with regards to, there are other offshoots or related indicators under Nexus, such as our ability to influence, just have ripple effects across the local tech ecosystem in terms of a certain mindset about being, impact driven or impact led across the other entities that we have. And I think those two primarily are our measures of success, but obviously the first is what we can actually tangibly measure.
Understood. Understood. And now, I guess going back now to our general conversation on social enterprises, and I think one of the things that I think we can all attest to with regard to social enterprises. I mean, their objective is really to improve or to address some sort of societal problem. So there is this whole, feel good aspect about, improving the lives and livelihoods of others. But,
Mhm.
what are some of the other benefits of running a social enterprise that either you know of or have experienced?
Well, apart from that feel good aspect, we have been able to attract some amazing purpose driven people and just connect with them. Like for instance, through our Hack Solve activities, it's a purely volunteer based event. But the types of people that we attract based on the nature of that activity, you can't necessarily ordinarily meet them just anywhere. We sort of bring the purpose-driven individuals out of the woodwork, and when you have a critical mass of purpose-driven people just sharing about ways in which you can make a difference, that in itself is rewarding. So that's another offshoot of it.
Okay. Nothing else?
Yeah, the feel good. I think the feel good can go in so many ways. The attracting of these amazing purpose-driven individuals, primarily those are the two main things. The other thing with the enterprise, I think on a business level, is definitely, given that you're in process and you're making impact, you also attract opportunity to you. So, for example, when we started the activities under Nexus, it was all self-funded until we got attention. We eventually wanted to approach IDB Lab for grants, but we said that we didn't really have a portfolio yet. But they came to us, so they effectively met us and said, we'd like to talk to you based on the work that you're doing. And one thing led to the next, and we won our first grant. And then, based on the successful execution of that first grant, we were awarded a second one. So in executing on the objectives of a social enterprise, you attract funding, even you attract opportunity too, along with the purpose driven individuals to help further the cause.
That might be true, but I'm also concerned, and I think some social enterprises have the experience, and probably just generally, not necessarily tech based alone, that you can be just jumping from one grant to the other, because especially if somehow if it's not I would say for profit, or somehow within the whole construct of the business, there are not ways to generate revenue that will sufficiently allow the business to be self-sustaining without um, external funding, that you may find that either you're jumping from donor funds, grant funding, and having to probably tweak whatever you're doing to satisfy the requirements to secure the funding, which may to varying degrees pull you from what your ultimate objectives are. And I'm wondering about that. I guess is that a risk that you envisage?
Oh, well, absolutely. It depends on how you look at the opportunity. So when we won our first grant, it was not just to execute that grant and be done with it. We always thought ahead. So much of what came out of that grant, or what's actually before us at this moment as a product of the grant, has a future, and we've designed that to be sustainable. It has to be done that way if you're going to work smart on the situation. And so, for instance, as an example, with the first grant, one of the notable things that came out of it was the Iris project, which is now through grant funding. It's been serving the needs of citizens with regards to informing them on COVID, but it's also allowed us to further develop the platform into this conversational AI multifaceted solution that can later on be used by companies, or even on a national level, or possibly in a region. So that in itself has been designed out of grant support to become a self-sustaining initiative. Secondly, the second grant in itself is also it's early on in terms of its execution, but it was designed from the inception to become this online type institution where persons can access training materials and matriculate into an actual career. And that later on eventually is going to become something that generates its own revenue, but it's seeded by grant funding. So there's always this thought behind the grant funding is another form of seed funding in a sense, but the initiative itself has to have a life beyond the grant, and this is how we've designed it.
Fantastic. And I guess hopefully that's something that others will take into account, because I do get the sense that for many social enterprise and maybe nonprofits as well, that you can be continually looking for grants to advance, well, not I guess just to keep the business afloat, not even to advance the business per se. And I guess one has to be mindful about there being alignment with what you consider the objectives of the business and the impact that you want it to have relative to what might be the imperatives of the donor agencies who are prepared to offer some financing.
Absolutely.
And just going back, you I guess one mentioned that Nexus Hub is non-profit, whereas V75 is for profit. Why did you set up Nexus Hub as a non-profit and not for profit?
Well, just going back a bit, so V75 was always impact led. So on a level, it could be seen as a social enterprise in its own right, but we wanted to fully realize our social impact led initiatives, and that was the reason why we crafted the nonprofit. In addition to that, to access certain grants, for instance, you have to have a not-for-profit organization. Has to
Mm.
be recognized as such to be impact-led as well. And the unique thing that happened, and this is something that I thought about, but not deeply, but it's something that was truly confirmed after the two entities began to forge their symbiotic relationship. They support one another, and that could be a possible formula for persons in the region who may want to mitigate risk in starting a social enterprise, if you have a for-profit entity that can bolster the execution and the objectives of your nonprofit entity, then it'll be wise to have them work together to grow each other. So this is what happened with V75 and Nexus Hub. So a case in point would be that even though we attracted funding through Clink for the paid apprenticeships, our original Clink connection came from our for-profit, where we started doing work for them, and we were able to introduce to them these paid apprenticeship um, programs when they started to ask for more, developers, more engineers. So we said, in addition to instead of us just supplying you the engineers, how about you think about creating opportunities for others, and then you fund these paid apprenticeship programs. So the for-profit was able to align the nonprofit with an opportunity there, and then later on, the nonprofit, after having trained those AI competency engineers, those individuals found a career path under the for-profit, which helped the nonprofit to realize its objectives ultimately. So the combination of the for-profit nonprofit symbiotic relationship helped tremendously to really realize the vision and to grow them, just to accelerate that growth. So that could be a formula that could be executed regionally.
Indeed, indeed. And I guess it's an interesting business model because I think you had mentioned earlier in the call that um, V75 is, I think, the anchor tenant for Nexus Hub in the space that you'll have.
Yes, sir.
So that at least there is this revenue stream at least that would have been coming in.
Absolutely.
And just going back to this whole issue about profitability and sustainability, and I think here in the region and in many instances, poverty may underpin most of our social problems in our societies, be it of the individual or of the country itself, what the country can and cannot afford to pay for, and you know the number of people that we have at the bottom of the pyramid and so on. And I'm thinking that, of course, it can make sustainability or even, I guess more so profitability of a business a problem. And I wondered whether or not if that was a challenge that you have experienced,
Mhm.
and more importantly, how you think it can be addressed in businesses generally, and probably more so for the social enterprises which are trying to address social and societal problems.
Right. Indeed. Just going back, it was an issue. It was challenging at first. At the time when we came up with the idea of Nexus, the nonprofit, V75 was not a developed company. We were a team of 5 people. So we were surviving on, we were on a project to project basis, surviving as a company, just surviving. So we were primarily focused on just trying to get the next project to pay the bills and to pay the staff and so forth. So it was pretty challenging on that in that regard. But we had this conviction, we had this belief in that the purpose that we were on, and we got the opportunity to secure a vacant space, which was a real risk that we took because we had to hold it down by paying rent. At the time, we were frantically searching for funding for the nonprofit. Much of the agencies that we approached, they didn't really understand the entity, and their response generally was, it didn't seem sustainable under the circumstances. So we weren't able to get that funding, but we made a breakthrough. We stuck on path, and there were many times where I decided to just give up because it didn't make sense financially to really invest in this or hold on to this particular space which was vacant. We didn't have the money to renovate it at the time, but we were able to. We took the plunge, and we decided to explore networking, and we eventually actually the CEO of Clink met with some members at the University of Guyana, and he was asking about local tech companies, and he somehow found his way to V75. He met with us. He told us about the technology, but at that time, his intentions weren't very clear. I know that he was here to meet with the university faculty because he himself was a faculty member of the University of Michigan. But then when we showed him just in passing the pitch deck for Nexus, his eyes lit up and it spoke to him. And then he said, "You know what? I'm going to take a chance on you guys, and you just send up two of your developers. We'll train you, and we'll see where it goes from there. If all goes well, you'll have enough revenue coming in to really start this project." And that's what the breakthrough was, and we were able to make good on the opportunity, and we took some of the revenue, most of the revenue that came in from the Clink connection to V75 to fund Nexus. And then we started the project, and eventually IDB found us, and it took off from there. So, there are always these constraints, these economic constraints. And it's easy to give up. It's easy to just say it doesn't make sense, but you have to sometimes put your belief before being realistic, and stick to the plan. And that's what we did, and we were able to make that breakthrough.
Understood. And I guess as you're talking and sharing that experience, I'm wondering about, you know, how much is luck and how much is preparation, that a lot of work would have been done before one met with the CEO of Link, of ClickLink, and
Click.
you know, and just being able to therefore being able to capitalize on the opportunity when it arose.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were definitely ready. We didn't know what would come out of that. We were hoping for the best, but the most important thing is that we were ready, and it happened.
And I think that is one of those lessons as well, because sometimes we sit on our laurels, and only when an opportunity is presented to us, we are prepared to run around and try to do all of the legwork that needs to be done, when
Absolutely.
it is better, and you're able to leverage the opportunity far greater if you had been prepared before.
Yes,
So that is something to
definitely. Hmm.
it certainly sort of had me thinking about it again
Hmm.
as you were speaking.
Yeah.
And as we begin to wind down, what might be the change in mindset that a tech entrepreneur might need to adopt if he or she wants to operate a social enterprise?
Hmm. Well, this is something that I've seen as, sadly to say, this prevailing mindset. There is a traditional business mindset, which is all good and well, and it's particularly formulaic in the way that you look at ventures, and you understand risk, and then you make investments and so on. But then there's this emerging mindset, and I've seen a critical mass building in the region and in Guyana of individuals that place belief over being realistic, as I mentioned, individuals that place purpose over profit, and understand that profit is just a side effect of being on purpose, of making that initial stride. And and they're, most of all, the persons who have that compassion to help, and that conviction to solve problems and make a difference. So there's a growing critical mass of those individuals that I've seen that have this sort of uh, mindset that kind of turns the traditional one on its head. That's more purpose driven. That's more belief driven. So in that regard, I believe that that's the mindset that an entrepreneur who is looking into a social enterprise needs to have. It's not a straight path. There will be winding, very treacherous turns, but what keeps you on the path will be that compassion to help and make a difference, that conviction to solve problems, being, inspired by purpose over profit. And if you have those things, if you look at the world in that way, know that it's not a dead end. You'll be supported for it way more than you expect traditionally.
Fantastic. And in your experience and your observation, has the tech entrepreneurial space and the ecosystem in Ghana, how has it changed over the last couple of years since we last spoke?
Oh, well, there, uh, I think I mentioned this the last time we spoke, to say that I can't confirm or deny, but I have a hunch that some of our works given that their sort of social impact led works within the tech space may have rippled forward and inspired others to do the same, which is really nice. So we've seen a lot of that come out. So there have been activities from other tech entities relating to youth development, relating to weaving in that sort of purpose driven perspective on running tech. There's been a lot of use of the term growing the local tech ecosystem as well, and activities that align with that particular expression. So in general, even though we have experienced growth in the local tech industry, but it hasn't been this expected business first type of growth. Some of the entities are kind of shifting in terms of casting a social enterprise type aura on what they're doing, because they realize that people are attracted, like talented people are attracted by purpose, and we've seen that. So unless you're really purpose driven, unless your entity is really aligned with that expression of purpose first, you won't necessarily attract the talent that you need to grow your company. This is something that we've experienced, and others are catching on to it. And then there is also, the spillout benefits of being, that feel good idea of making a difference and creating that impact as well. So there have been ripples that have been casted in terms of the local tech ecosystem that adopt much of the things that we started to push forward originally, starting from 2017. Yeah.
Okay. And I think especially the whole issue about purpose driven, I think that seems to be very characteristic of your sort of Gen Z
Mhm.
person. So even I think, so for those who may be coming and working in the tech space, but even as consumers, that they may not necessarily just be driven by whether or not the product is sexy, but what does the company stand for? What are its values? What is it trying to do and what it's trying to achieve? And I think for them, there has to be, they need to identify, there has to be a sense of alignment in values between what they believe and what they hope for versus what companies are doing these days. So for us, who might be a bit older, we may not even have given much thought as to who, what the company was, what they did, and so on. Once whatever they were producing was something that we needed or felt was of value, but they may not be as inclined, and that I think is probably some what you are also seeing and experiencing within your business, and what maybe also be happening in Guyana as well.
So true. So true. Yep.
And have you found that even like your support structures, whether or not it's I guess banks, lending institutions, um, even I guess the availability of space and so on, some of the support elements of the ecosystem, how has that changed or improved over the last couple of years?
Well, there hasn't been, sadly to say, there hasn't been much change in terms of those support elements over the years to social enterprises. As a matter of fact, we're due for an overhaul in terms of recognizing these entities and or having these entities recognize social enterprises and the works and importance of these types of enterprises as well. But I believe with more social enterprises locally, and the fact that there's a pervasiveness of these grants, donor aids, and so on that come in, and the need for the executing agencies to make good on them. I believe that these other supporting structures will get the memo and adjust. Yeah,
Yeah, I hope so
I
as
hope
well.
so. Fingers crossed.
Yes. And I guess one of my last questions, where do you see Nexus Hub in the next 3 to 5 years? And I think coming out of 2020 and perhaps the adjustments that have had to be made, and some of them probably for the better, but where do you see Nexus Hub, and how has the new plans, has it changed from what you probably would have told me a couple of years ago?
Well, yes, they've been pivoted just a bit. We are still on track with the whole tech park initiative, but given the pandemic, we've shifted our execution to a solution that will execute upon it virtually, which has its benefits because our reach can go wider, and we can make more impact that way. And so primarily we're looking at ways in which we can pull that off in a virtual manner, as opposed to having persons physically situated in close proximity to one another in a physical structure. But we're still on track with the Tech Park initiative because we believe that it's the culmination of what we're after, to ensure that we grow the talent acquisition capability locally by by investing in our intellectual capital, and that'll have forward. The ripples will go forward towards growing the tech entities as well. And as long as we have that critical mass, the opportunities will come in. And so we've sort of mapped this entire dynamic out, and we're anxious to see how it plays out during the new grant that we have right now. So that's primarily what we're looking forward to in the next 5 years for Nexus, just to ramp up the industrial training activities, the creation of opportunities, the growth of more cutting edge tech specializations locally and perhaps regionally. Actually, I would say most likely regionally, and ultimately ensuring that the region becomes this new Silicon Valley eventually.
Absolutely. I'm so happy that you're talking regionally as well, because it's wonderful to hear all of the wonderful, the things that are happening in each individual country. But somehow, and I mean, collectively, it all helps us to advance as a region. But I do think, though, that again, we're still so siloed that really the sort of cross pollination and the benefits, the mutual and I guess holistic benefits that could be realized. I don't think enough of our companies and enough of our businesses tap into that as much as I would like. So hopefully, I'm looking forward to seeing what Nexus Hub and even V75 will be doing regionally. Especially, we spoke about Iris and so on the last time, and the regional potential that it could have. I'm hoping to see something come up that sooner rather than later.
Definitely. Yeah. Me too. I'm excited.
A- And my last question, which was my last question the last time, what's next for Eldon Marks?
Oh, well, yeah, I'm looking at trying to slow things down a bit. Running two very, yeah, active companies can take a lot out of you, especially if you have a family as well. So luckily, the companies have grown to an extent where I have very, very capable lieutenants, and so I'll be pulling away, working on secret projects. As a matter of fact, I'm working on a secret project, something that I've had in my mind for years, and I believe that it's very timely at the moment. You'll probably see certain appearances on discussion forums like these as well, because I love having these conversations about growing the region using technology, and I think apart from that, it'll be primarily around the works, just making sure that Nexus realizes its vision. That's about it for me personally.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm not going to press you for more details on your secret project as yet, but I'm hopeful that at least, in due course, you will share it with us and really for us to hear what you've been up to. But thank you so much again, Eldon, for just joining me again and to talk about the Nexus Hub V75 and just social entrepreneurship and tech businesses that are designed to have some sort of social impact, because it's something that we don't see a lot of in the region. As I have said to my listeners before, that in trying to identify a tech-based social enterprise every month to highlight it during the podcast for one of the podcasts a month, I'm concerned that I might run out of entities to interview before the year is up. But we will see. I'm up for the fight, and really I do think though that it is one of these frontiers that we still have not really mastered. here in the region, because we know we may be facing so many other challenges, and we really need to ensure that our businesses are a success based on the environments in which we operate and in which we live. So I think it's just wonderful what Nexus Hub and V75 are doing, and I guess trying to make some sort of impact in Ghana, which hopefully, which I know already, but which is trickling across the region, but will even begin to have greater impact across the region and more visible impact across the region.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Ken.
You're very welcome.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to the ICT Pulse podcast. You can find links to some of the things we talked about on our website, ict-pulse.com. If you like this episode, please show your support by leaving us a review on iTunes, as it will help others find the show. You can email us at info@ict-pulse.com or drop us a note on our Facebook page, facebook.com/ICTPulse, or via Twitter @ICTPulse. We hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Take care.